Before the Great War, Europe felt like a tinderbox. It was a place of great empires and proud nations. They were all connected by deals and promises. These promises were called alliances. They were like pacts made between friends in the schoolyard. If one got into a fight, the others had to join in and help. The big groups were the Triple Entente: Britain, France, Russia. On the other side was the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. Everyone was building bigger armies and bigger navies. They were showing off their strength like proud lions puffing out their chests. The air was thick with suspicion and rivalry. One hot summer's day changed everything. It was June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo. He rode in an open-topped car with his wife, Sophie. Crowds lined the streets to see the royal couple. A young man, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, was waiting in the crowd. At first, everyone thought the war would be over by Christmas. The young men marched off with smiles. They were promised adventure glory. Families waved them off at stations. Hope. They expected their boys home soon, heroes. But that dream faded. Armies clashed in great battles. The Battle of the Marne in France. Fighting was fierce and bloody. Neither side could score a decisive blow. Old tactics, cavalry charges, marching in lines, could not face new machine guns. Armies began to dig. Long, deep ditches, the trenches. They stretched for hundreds of miles from the coast of Belgium to the Swiss border, the Western Front. Life in the trenches was a living nightmare. Soldiers lived in mud, filth. Rain filled the ditches, sometimes up to their waists. Rats as big as cats scurried everywhere, feeding on scraps. Shelling was constant and deafening. A world of mud, blood, fear. The Great War was a time of terrible invention. New ways to kill were created at a shocking speed. Giant cannons, called artillery, could fire explosive shells for miles. They pounded the trenches day and night, turning the landscape into a moonscape. The machine gun, a chattering monster of a weapon, could cut down hundreds of men in minutes. Then came poison gas. It drifted across no man's land in a silent, deadly cloud. It burned the lungs and blinded the eyes. Soldiers had to wear gas masks, which made it hard to breathe and see. They looked like terrifying insects. The war was also fought in the sky and on the sea. At first, aeroplanes were used just to see what the enemy was doing. Pilots would fly over the trenches and take photographs. Soon they tried to shoot at each other. Then planes were fitted with machine guns. Epic dogfights took place high above the clouds. Down below on the oceans, new submarines called U-boats prowled beneath the waves. These German submarines would sink supply ships heading for Britain, trying to starve the country into surrender. The war was everywhere. While the soldiers fought, life back home changed completely. The war affected everyone, not just those in uniform. With so many men away fighting, women had to step up and take their places. They worked in factories, making bullets and shells. They worked on farms, drove trams, delivered mail. They proved they could do the jobs just as well as men. This was a huge change for society. The war effort needed everyone to do their part. People at home faced shortages of food and fuel. Governments introduced rationing, giving each family small amounts of sugar, meat, and bread each week. Governments used posters and newspapers to keep spirits high, propaganda. But there was also sadness and worry. Every day, families would wait for the postman, dreading the sight of a telegram. For 3 long years, the war had been a bloody stalemate. The lines of trenches barely moved, millions had died for nothing. But in 1917, 2 enormous events changed the war forever. First, the United States declared war on Germany. German U-boats were sinking American ships. A secret message tried to pull Mexico into war against the USA. The American people were outraged. Fresh, enthusiastic American soldiers, doughboys, arrived and boosted Allied manpower and morale. At the same time, a revolution was tearing Russia apart. The Tsar was overthrown after huge protests. The new government pulled Russia out of the war. Germany could shift soldiers from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. In spring 1918, they launched the Spring Offensive. The attack smashed through Allied lines at first. They advanced for miles. Paris seemed in danger, but German troops were exhausted and low on supplies. The Allies, now reinforced by Americans, held the line. They bent, but did not break. Led by new tactics and by tanks that crossed trenches and barbed wire, the Allies launched a counterattack. It was the 100 Days Offensive, the start of the end. The German army was pushed back, step by step. Austria-Hungary was collapsing. The Ottoman Empire was collapsing. Armies surrendered, civilians starved, German sailors mutinied, refusing a final suicidal mission. German leaders realized they could not win. The final push had failed. The arrival of the Americans had tipped the balance. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, in 1918, the guns fell silent. An armistice was signed, an agreement to stop fighting. The Great War was over. Soldiers climbed out of their trenches, not to fight, but to stare at the eerie silence. Some cautiously shook hands with the men they had been trying to kill just hours before. The news spread across the world. People poured into the streets, cheering, crying, embracing. The nightmare was finally over. But the world they returned to was a very different place. It was a world full of ghosts and scars. The cost of the war was immense. More than 16 million people were dead. Soldiers, civilians. Entire generations of young men were wiped out. Millions more were wounded, their bodies and minds shattered by what they had seen and done. The war also redrew the map of the world. The German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian. They crumbled and broke apart into many new, smaller countries. The leaders of the winning countries met in Paris to decide the terms of the peace. They created the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty blamed Germany for the entire war. It forced Germany to pay huge sums of money, give up land, and shrink its army. Many people, especially in Germany, felt this was deeply unfair. They felt humiliated. This anger and resentment would simmer for years to come. It planted a bitter seed that would, just 20 years later, grow into an even more terrible conflict, the Second World War. The peace was not a true peace. It was just a pause in the fighting. The Great War changed the world forever. It was called the war to end all wars, but it did not. It led to new ideas and new technologies, but it also showed the terrible darkness that humanity was capable of. It gave women a new place in society and toppled old empires, but it also left a deep, lasting scar on the soul of the world. We remember the fallen soldiers, the poets who wrote of the horrors, and the horses who served alongside them. We remember so that we never forget the price of war. We remember so it never, ever happens again.